Welcome to the Therapy and Prayer Podcast. Here you'll find the intersection between faith and mental health. I'm your host, Camille. I'm a licensed therapist and clinical social worker, but more importantly, I'm a Christian who really loves the Lord. And I'm just trying to navigate this life without falling victim to it, just like everyone else. Here we take a faith-based approach to all things mental health and wellness, because the Bible tells us to guard our heart and mind, and sometimes we need a little bit of help with that. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Therapy and Prayer Podcast. I'm your host Camille, and I'm so happy to see y'all. You have no idea. Let me tell you, it has been a bit of a journey since we last spoke. Honestly, y'all, sometimes when I know that I be exposing myself, but sometimes I really just want to get on here and just tell all my business. Sometimes I feel like we just need to chit chat, and I just need to let you know what's going on in my life. But long story short, immediately, and I mean immediately after I finished recording the last episode, God hit me with a 1-2 that I did not see coming and have never experienced before. And ever since then, it has been kind of intense. Me and the Lord, we've been working through some things. We've been boxing a little bit, but in love, always in love. And that was the inspiration for today's episode. I shared some last week just about where I had been spiritually and what some of my focus had been and some of the revelation that God had given me just about being self-centered and how I was really wanting to move into this space of not prioritizing or idolizing my own comfort and convenience as much, because that's what I had been doing. And that was making it hard for me to have a godly level of self-control and temperance. Y'all, honestly, we need to be careful and be prepared for the things that we pray for, because I'm over here like, God, less of me, more of you. And everything that I have is for you. I just want to be a good steward. I don't need to be comfortable or convenient. I just want to give you my yes. And God was like, word, bet. So I realized that he was priming my heart for a very difficult yes. But because I had been in that space, and I feel like my ears and the ears of my heart had been kind of fine-tuned to God as Lord, and really trying to embrace that relationship with him as the one who orders each and every one of my steps, then I knew that this was the test of all those things immediately. And we talk about a lot of things, and we pray about a lot of things and for a lot of things. But we're not always prepared for what it's going to look like when we are required to put those things into action. And I just I'm really having some real life experiences of that right now, of having to put into practice the things that I have been praying for, the ways that I'm trying to grow. And it made me think about what happens a lot with my clients in therapy, which is this whole idea of intellectualizing things. And we feel like simply because we have the knowledge of something, or we understand something intellectually or theoretically, that ought to fix whatever issue it is, or that ought to bridge the gap for the growth that it is that we're seeking. But I've said over and over again that knowing something is different than having the wisdom to apply that knowledge. Knowing something is different than understanding it. It's different than feeling it. It's different than experiencing it. So that happens a lot with us spiritually as well. Knowing something is different from actually living it and walking it out. So I'm in a space now where I'm really having to walk out, not having to, because that makes it sound like a chore. That makes it sound like bondage. But I'm in a space now where I have an opportunity to live out the things that I have known intellectually, the things that I've said I wanted, and the things that I've said I was willing to do. And now it's time to live it out. We say all the time, God, I surrender my life to you, and, order my steps, and I'll go wherever you want me to go. And then when it's clear that God is wanting you to go somewhere or do something, we have to say yes, if that's what we've been asking all this time. So that's one of the lessons that I'm having to put into practice that has been really difficult for me, but it has brought back to my remembrance this whole relationship between knowledge and wisdom. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. The difference between knowing something intellectually and then having the wisdom to apply that thing as it is designed, or the wisdom to apply that thing, the humility and the wisdom to apply what we know, even when it doesn't look the way that we think it's going to look. I hope this is making sense. I think one of the things that we ask for the most as Christians is wisdom, because we want to know things. I don't think we like this idea of being childlike in our knowledge and understanding. We want to know as much as we can, because we want to make good decisions. We want to make good decisions for ourselves. But even that approach to wisdom, I think maybe is not the wisest approach to wisdom. We want wisdom so that we can make good decisions. And I think sometimes we want to be able to make good decisions apart from God. We want wisdom so that we'll just know what to do, and then we won't have to go through this whole process of asking God and waiting to hear his voice and wondering what he's saying. And so then we'll just know to make the right decision, and we'll just cut out the middleman altogether. So even as we're seeking wisdom, maybe it's still about control in some ways. But actual wisdom is not simply about making the right or wrong decisions. Wisdom is the appropriate application of knowledge and of the things that we know. It's not just this capacity to always know the right thing to say or to know the right thing to do. Sometimes the wisest thing that we can do is say, I do not know, and I am not equipped in this area. Sometimes that's the wisest thing to do. But I think we hold wisdom on this pedestal almost, and that becomes this like badge of honor that we want. We want to be so wise. But wisdom comes from experience. It only comes through experience. My dad said something, I'm going to get it wrong, but he said something to the effect of the lessons that bring the most wisdom always cost the most, or like it's always, wisdom is always very costly, or like the best wisdom is always very costly. Something like that. But it comes from experience. It comes from maybe making what we might consider wrong decisions. It comes from experiencing pain or suffering or unnecessary difficulty. That's where the wisdom comes from. We don't just wake up and all of a sudden know the right things to do all the time. It doesn't happen like that. And so I think that we often ask for wisdom, and we want wisdom because we want to cut out the middleman. We want to rush through the messy parts of life. We want to rush through the messy and hard parts of growth. So much of what we try to do is about cutting out the messy parts, cutting out the hard parts. We're always wanting to make life easier. And I am absolutely guilty of this, have absolutely been guilty of this. And I think that's a part of why God has me where he has me right now, is because I have prioritized ease so much and comfort and convenience so much. But I think that a wise approach is knowing that you cannot always be comfortable, but you can always be content. You can find contentment even in the discomfort. But I think that's a lesson that also only comes through an experience of not being comfortable and still somehow finding contentment. Because when you're in situations that are really uncomfortable, then you're looking for something to hold on to. You're looking for something to give you a bit of comfort, a bit of peace. You're looking for that contentment, and you find that it's still available to you and accessible to you, even when your circumstances don't change. But that's not an easy lesson to learn. And so that wisdom only comes from being uncomfortable. And I think that's also something that we can know intellectually, but we don't know what it's going to look like for us. And everyone applies these different intellectual and theoretical principles differently. It's going to look different in your life than it is in mine. And so we all have to learn at our own pace and in our own timing, and in God's own timing for our life. But we're all going to learn these lessons very differently. So I think that we really need to just give up this whole idea of trying to skip through the hard parts, right? And learning everything the easy way. We can only learn so much the easy way. We can only learn so much through other people's witness and other people's testimony. We can learn to a certain extent through all of that, but we're going to have to learn how to apply that in our own life. And that is, we only get that out of the mud. So knowing something is different than having the wisdom to apply it. An example that comes up for me and that I see so clearly now is in these old church hymns that we sing, right? We've been singing the same hymns, some of the same songs for my whole entire life. So I have known the words. I know the songs front and back. I've been singing them since I was a child. But there's something about singing those songs after you done lived a little bit, and those songs take on a whole different meaning. We sing a song called Hold to God's Unchanging Hand. And I've been singing that song since I was a kid. And some of them old songs, I'm like, oh, yeah, here it go. Okay, well, let's just sing it and kind of move past it. But now, oh, baby, let me tell you, now when I sing Hold to God's Unchanging Hand, that one is going to take me up, okay? That's a different kind of worship than it was when I was singing that when I was a kid, because I've had some experiences where that's really what I had to do. And so it means something different to me now. I understand it differently now. I have the wisdom to apply that knowledge of the fact that, yes, God is always there, but what does that actually look like when you need something to hold on to? We don't get that until we walk through it. And there are a lot of other things that we know about ourselves. And this happens a lot in therapy. We know these things about ourselves, but we don't know what to do with that information. You might know that you're avoidant. You might know that you're anxious. You might know that you need some better coping skills. You might know that you have trauma in your past and in your history. But just knowing that is not going to facilitate the healing on its own. It's about knowing it and then extracting the pieces of information that are relevant to how you live your life now, being able to recognize how those things are showing up now, being able to recognize the patterns of behavior that are a result of those things that have been lying dormant in you for so long, and then being willing to do the hard work of healing some of those wounds that have been there so long. Maybe taking some of those wounds to God and submitting them to Him and asking for Him to enter into some of these spaces that you don't even really like to go in a real way. You just like to acknowledge that it's there. You like to think about it, but you don't like to spend time in it. But we got to be able to spend some time there, and we have to invite God to spend some time in there with us. So that is a different process than just knowing logically and intellectually that something exists and that something is there. Now, the thing with knowledge, right? When we know something, then I think we have a responsibility to put it into practice when the opportunity presents itself. And that is a type of accountability that I don't know we're always prepared for. I know I'm not always prepared for it and wasn't always prepared for it. Long story, very, very short. There was an opportunity that I was getting ready to take. And then at the last minute, there was a switch and so now a different opportunity presented itself, one that I was not originally interested in, would not have been interested in. But the way that it all happened made it very clear to me that this secondary opportunity was the one that God was directing me to take. And I keep saying and kept saying, I feel like Jonah. I feel like Jonah. Let me tell you something. Whenever we used to read about Jonah, I used to get so mad at him. If you're not familiar with the story of Jonah, God told Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh and preach. Jonah said, nah, not interested. And so he went the other way. And then he ended up getting swallowed by a giant fish, and he stayed in the belly of that fish for 3 days. And then the fish spit him out, and Jonah ran to Nineveh, which is where God was trying to send him. Ever since I was a child, that story irritated me because I was like, Jonah, who do you think you are? God is giving you very clear instruction. God said to you very clearly, I want you to go to Nineveh. You think you can just do what you want to do? You think you can just not go where God wants you to go? And now look at you, looking dumb, got swallowed up by a fish. Who gets swallowed by a fish, Jonah? Like I really used to be like, what a dummy. What are you doing? And then my situation presented itself. And the way that it happened, one day I'll tell y'all the whole story, but I'm still in it. Okay. So wait till the testimony on the other side of it. But the way that it was presented to me, There was no other way for me to see it than the fact that God was clearly and directly telling me, I want you to go here. There was no other way for me to see it. For me to see it any other way would have been disobedient, especially because I had been in a place spiritually and mentally of really wanting to surrender everything that I do and everything in my life to God, looking for more opportunities to surrender my will to His, asking for Him to remove my self-centeredness so that I could have more of a heart of service and so that I could have a heart of obedience, right? This is where I was. So He was priming me to give Him that yes. If y'all could read some of the entries in my prayer journal leading up to this opportunity, there's just no other way that I could see it. So I'm like, dang, Jonah, my bad, because I definitely don't want to go over here. But I have to because God is telling me to. And what kind of a hypocrite would I be if I talked and preached so much about being willing to do what God wants me to do, about desiring His will more than mine, being willing to give up whatever it is to please Him, right? If I'm talking so much about how sovereign God is and how it's safer in His arms than it is anywhere else, and that He goes ahead of me, and so He's already preparing the way for me, right? I'm saying all of this. How much of a hypocrite would I be to then say, no, I don't want to go over there, God? Hello? Couldn't do it, right? So this is an example of me having to put things into practice that I have known on some level for a very long time. And we do this a lot in our life. And as we are growing and healing and evolving through things, we know things on one level, but we're not always prepared or willing to put them into practice when the situation presents itself. So you might know that you have an unhealthy communication style and that you are easily triggered when people speak to you a certain way, right? You might know what some of your boundaries are that you want to have in place, but when it comes time to actually enforce those boundaries, we don't know what to do, or we don't want to do it, or it's too hard. And so we just don't. And it's easier to just do what we've always done and more comfortable to do that. Or our ego gets too big and we feel like we don't want to have to be the ones to make allowances for people. We don't want to have to be the ones to acknowledge something first because we weren't the ones that caused the hurt. And so all these other things come up and get in the way of us being able to have the wisdom to apply the knowledge that we have. There are so many opportunities that present themselves to us to do things differently, to make different choices, to apply the things that we know and the things that we have learned. But for whatever reason, we want the knowledge itself to be enough to change everything else, right? But if that knowledge only stays internal, if it doesn't actually interact with anything around you, then how is it supposed to make any kind of a difference? What is that knowledge supposed to do if it only stays in your head? If you never live it out, if you never apply it, then what good is it? And I think sometimes we only have a certain amount of knowledge about something, but maybe we don't fully understand the implications of it, right? And knowledge without understanding is not really knowledge, I don't think. So I've been thinking about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. And in the Bible, these two are paired together a lot because we gain knowledge first. That is the information. And then wisdom comes from experience of applying the knowledge, applying the information appropriately or inappropriately, and learning from that as well on the other side of it. So I was thinking about knowledge and wisdom and understanding and all of these things that we read so much about and we hear so much about and we pray so much about. And I started thinking, why do we actually want the knowledge that we claim to want? Why do we need to know so many answers to these questions that are not even always answerable? Why do we yearn for that so much? And do we seek wisdom and understanding in the same way that we seek knowledge. There's a phrase that says that knowledge is power. And I think that maybe we have amended that. And I think sometimes we feel like knowledge is protection. And maybe to a certain extent it can be. Maybe sometimes it can be. But as we've talked about at length here, there is no way of avoiding suffering. But I do think that sometimes that's why we seek so much knowledge. We want to rationalize and justify certain things that have happened in our lives or happened to us. We feel like if we can have more information or if we can understand the pain better, then we can neutralize it and it won't hurt as much. So it's almost like a way of bargaining. In the one of the stages of grief is bargaining. And what that looks like is trying to make sense of what happened, trying to make sense of the loss, right? If I had just been there, or if only we had answered the phone or left 5 minutes earlier, or if we hadn't have gotten into that fight, like really trying to make sense of things. It's called bargaining, because if we can make sense of it, then it won't hurt as much. Part of why loss hurts so much is because it feels like it's senseless, and it feels unjust. It feels unfair. And so I think that is similar for a lot of the pain and suffering and things that we go through. It feels unjust. It feels unfair. So if we can have just some more information about it, then maybe we can neutralize some of that pain that comes from walking through that thing. If we can intellectualize it and rationalize it, then maybe it won't hurt so bad. If we can get out of the feelings and into the thinking of it all, then maybe it'll be a little bit easier to walk through. I think that's the rationale sometimes. Because we're always seeking to avoid more pain and suffering. I don't know. We're always seeking to avoid pain and suffering, even though that is impossible. But we also don't want to be careless. I don't want to paint this narrative or idea that we might as well just be reckless because there's going to be pain and suffering anyway. That's not what I'm endorsing. What I am saying is that we put a lot of energy and effort into trying to avoid things that have not happened. We feel like if we just know more, then we won't walk through as much pain and suffering. Now, maybe there might be certain types of pain and suffering that you may not walk through, but there's no way of completely avoiding it. I think it's important to mention that so that we can take that pressure off of ourselves. Not so that we stop seeking knowledge. We shouldn't stop seeking knowledge. And the Bible talks about that, about seeking knowledge and understanding and wisdom. We should continue to do that. But I want us to think about our intention behind why we are seeking this knowledge. If we are seeking this knowledge because we think that it is going to protect us, that is misguided. And then when we still fall and we still hurt and we still suffer, then we're going to blame ourselves for it. And that's a really unhealthy pattern that I really want us to stay away from. Knowledge is important, but that's not why it's important. It cannot protect us from what is guaranteed in this life. Suffering is guaranteed in this life. You can be the smartest and wisest person and you will still have pain. That is a fact. And so we really have to accept that, right? And so I want us to think about the intention. We have to think about why we're doing pretty much everything. Why am I seeking this knowledge, this particular knowledge right now? Why am I trying so hard to figure out this thing or this person? Right. And is it because I'm trying to avoid some pain? Is it because I want a sense of control? These are all things that are not our responsibility. And so now this thing, right, knowledge, which is godly, now this thing is serving a different function and a different purpose that it was not created to serve in our life. And so if we're trying to use something in a way that it was not designed, then it's always going to fall short and it's not going to do what we expect it to do. And then we're going to be disappointed for a whole other slew of reasons. So I think it's really important that we have an understanding of the function that certain things were created to serve in our life. But all of these things that we're talking about, seeking knowledge to avoid pain and suffering and for control and to rationalize and to neutralize the pain. That is when we are seeking knowledge outside of the fear of God. Okay, so I was getting ready for this episode. I'm thinking about knowledge and wisdom. So of course I ended up going to Proverbs, right? That is the book of wisdom. And if you want to study anything about wisdom, you're gonna go to Proverbs. You're gonna spend a good amount of your time there, if not all of it. And in the first chapter of Proverbs, it talks about the fact that knowledge and understanding comes from the fear of God. So if we are seeking knowledge outside of the fear of God, then that is not the kind of knowledge that God actually has for us. We are seeking knowledge to do things that we ought to trust God to do, which is to protect us and to comfort us and to keep us safe. But we're seeking knowledge to do those things instead of relying on God to do those things. So seeking knowledge outside of the fear of God was not the design, was never the design. Yeah, the verse says, this is not our verse of the day, by the way. So prepare yourselves. There's going to be some more. But Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So if you are seeking knowledge outside of the fear of the Lord, then this is not the type of godly knowledge that is going to lead to godly wisdom. With a lot of these concepts, right, there are like multiple types and multiple definitions. There is knowledge and wisdom according to the world, and then there is knowledge and wisdom according to God. Actually, we're going to come back to that, these different types of wisdom, when we do get to our scripture of the day. But this one that's talking about the fear of the Lord being the beginning of knowledge, I really want us to think about what that means. Because when I was talking about intention and like, why are we seeking these things? Like immediately we're starting off in different places. If we're seeking knowledge to protect ourselves, that's different from seeking knowledge because of the fear of the Lord. And fear meaning like reverence and honor and respect. When the Bible talks about in Isaiah, it was prophesying about when Christ would come and how we would know that it was him. And it was saying that he would have the spirit of the Lord, which is the spirit of wisdom, the spirit of understanding, the spirit of counsel, the spirit of might, the spirit of knowledge, and the spirit of the fear of the Lord. These are all things that Christ would have. And this is how we would know that he is who he said he is, and that he is the Messiah that was coming. But in Isaiah, it says his delight is in the fear of the Lord. So Jesus, even though he was God, was humble enough to fear God, right? So that's when we say the fear of the Lord, that's a very different heart posture. That's a different starting point when we are seeking knowledge about things of this world, about things of the spirit, when we are seeking knowledge from that place, right? And even as I'm walking through what I'm walking through, I have to be grateful, because I'm so grateful that I'm able to recognize the hand of God. And I think it's because of this fear of the Lord, right? Which is revealing to me the hand and instruction of God. If I was seeking knowledge from a different place, I would be walking through this season of my life very differently, very much self-centered, like we talked about last time. If we're seeking knowledge and wisdom so that we can keep ourselves safe, so that we can neutralize our own pain, so that we can make the right decision, so that our life can be easier. If we have this self-centered approach to seeking knowledge and seeking wisdom, then that is not the instruction that God gave us. And that's not the godly knowledge and godly wisdom. That's not the knowledge and wisdom that comes from the fear of God. That is not the knowledge of wisdom that's part of having the spirit of the Lord, which is the spirit that Christ had in him, which is always our goal, which should always be our goal. But like, what does it actually mean? And how do we live that out? Like that, this is one of those things that we always say, like, yes, I want to have, I fear the Lord, and I want to have the spirit of wisdom and of knowledge and the spirit of the fear of the Lord and all of that. Like that stuff sounds really good to say. It sounds really good to say. But when the rubber meets the road, we got to stand on that. So what does that look like for you to really stand on that and to operate from a place, from a posture of the fear of God, instead of operating from a place and posture of self? This whole phrase of dying to self has taken on such new meaning to me over the last few years, but especially right now in my life has taken on such new meaning. But that is what we were called to do, commanded to do, and that is what we say we want to do. And so there's going to come a time in all of our life where God says, prove it, where God trusts us enough to actually require us to die to ourselves. I think maybe there were times where God knew that I would not be willing to die to myself in ways that I'm willing to do now, right? If a similar situation happened to me 6 months ago, a year ago, I would have went about it very, very differently, very differently. And so even though it's not the easiest, has not been the easiest, and honestly speaking, all of the things that have made it difficult had to do with myself and with my flesh, right? So for me in this space, in this season of my life, dying to myself actually is the mercy. Dying to myself, meaning putting aside or getting over my feelings about something, giving myself enough space to like express all of those things. Okay, girl, cry it out, do what you have to do, right? Getting over my ego. Moving those things to the side allows me to just be in God's will, to just exist there. And that is a mercy. Honestly, that's a blessing in itself. So now dying to myself is not only a sacrificial thing, but it's mercy and it's grace, because otherwise, I think that sometimes we walk through things and we're like, we are reluctantly obedient and we're begrudgingly obedient and we're like hesitantly obedient. Think about what those things invite into your space and into your walk. When I'm reluctant and begrudging, then that means that I am carrying bitterness, I'm carrying resentment, I'm carrying irritation, I'm carrying frustration. That means that I am not looking at God, but instead I'm looking for ways out. I'm looking for ways to usurp authority over what God has said in my life. Like that's what I'm bringing when I am obeying that way. So what would happen if we could die to that part of it, to the reluctancy and to the begrudging and to the resistance? If we could die to that and simply just exist in God's will, like just walk in God's will. And of course, easier said than done. Oh, absolutely easier said than done. But I don't think I ever, and honestly, until I'm talking about it right now, I don't think I ever saw dying to myself as a mercy. But really, I think it is, because my flesh, honestly, these days, my flesh is becoming so much of a burden for me sometimes. Like as I'm being really intentional and like in studying these different spiritual fruits and trying to grow in these spiritual fruits, I'm just seeing how my flesh is getting in the way, or how my flesh is in contrast to these spiritual fruits. And so I am seeing my flesh as a barrier in a lot of ways that it's new for me. So like my relationship with my flesh is one that is fluctuating, or it's changing right now, but I'm seeing it as a barrier and as a burden a little bit. And maybe that is part of our burden. Our burden is that we're human, and we are human, and we need to know how to walk in that so that we can exist in the spiritual, right? Not instead of existing in the spiritual, or not we're human first and then we're spirit. No. So there is a space for our human experience. Absolutely there is, because we're in it, right? So even as, all these things are happening with me and I'm having to like shift my mindset and prepare to walk into something that I was not expecting at all, I had to be real with myself and say, this is uncomfortable. This is painful. I am angry about this. I'm frustrated about this. I don't understand. I was very emotional about it. And I knew that those emotions had to come out. And they did. And they probably are still coming out even a little bit. But I knew that was necessary. So dying to self is not about ignoring our humanity. I think sometimes It's about releasing it. It's about having an outlet. And I talk about that a lot. We need to have an outlet. We need to have an emotional outlet because these things are going to happen that are going to cause us to have an emotional reaction, an emotional response because we're humans. But what do we do with it? If we just hold on to it or try to ignore it or try to suppress it, then it's going to show up as we're trying to walk out our assignment, or it's going to stop us from walking out our assignment. How did I get here? What was I talking about? Okay, I was talking about doing things from a place of the fear of God versus a place of self. Right. So as I'm growing and God is revealing all these things to me about myself and my self-centeredness, I'm seeing my flesh in new ways, in different ways. And it's almost like this is something that we have to tend to so that it does not interfere with our assignment. We have to tend to the needs of the flesh so that it does not interfere with our spiritual assignment. Is that making sense? And I hope that this is not contradictory, but that's what I'm finding. So I took some time to myself, had a couple of good cries about it, spent a lot of time talking to God, telling him how mad I was and how confused I was and how frustrated, talking to family. Went on a little road trip, had a little solo trip. I took myself out to feel better, had a couple more breakdowns. Like I did all of that. I did all of that because I knew it was necessary. I knew that it would not be healthy for me just to carry it. And I think that sometimes the enemy wants us to carry these things because he knows that they have the potential to interfere with our assignment. So now that I've released all of that, right, and I have allowed space for all of that, and I feel like I've let some of that go and I'm not, just carrying it, it allows me now to walk forward in my assignment from a place of the fear of the Lord, from a place of obedience, instead of a place of resentment, a place of bitterness, a place of let me hurry up and get this over with so I can go and do what I actually want to do. But now I'm looking for God in everything. I'm looking for opportunities to walk out my assignment. I'm looking for opportunities to be obedient, and I'm able to see other potential blessings that I did not anticipate and that I maybe would not be able to see if I was still in the feelings of it all. So sometimes we do have to tend to the needs of our flesh so that we can walk in obedience in the spirit. But whatever we do, we ought to be doing it from a place of the fear of God. Like that is the posture. How is this thing showing reverence to God? Or how is this thing is this a result of the reverence and the fear that I have for God and who he is and the position that he holds in my life? That should be at the root of any effort that we put forth to gain any kind of knowledge or understanding or wisdom. If that's not at the root, then we are not seeking godly knowledge and godly wisdom and instruction. So that is going to lead us into our scripture for the day. Okay, so today's scripture is coming from James 3, and we're going to be looking at verse 13 through 17. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. Okay, so this verse is talking about the different types of wisdom that we could be seeking. And we really have to use some discernment to make sure that the wisdom that we are seeking is godly wisdom and not worldly wisdom. And it really kind of laid it out for us, like what's earthly wisdom versus spiritual wisdom or godly wisdom, which is the one that we should be seeking. So it said that earthly wisdom was motivated by envy. So think about comparison and how much we're comparing to other people, right? So that type of earthly wisdom comes from envy, and envy comes from comparison. So immediately we're starting from a place of self. They have what I don't have, or they have what I want, right? So immediately that's where we're starting from. And then it's full of selfish ambition, which a lot of times is a grab for control or a grab for power. We want to lift ourselves up, right? So that's the ego and that's the pride. So this earthly wisdom is full of envy, comparison, ego, pride, selfish ambition, control, and power. These are the things that the world might say would make you wise. Or rather, when we are seeking wisdom according to the world's standards, these are the things that we're going to find. And so that's how you're going to know that this is not of God. If you're finding these things there, if you're finding the envy and the comparison and the selfish ambition and all of that, it's not of God, and you're not seeking wisdom from a place of the fear of the fear of the Lord, right? This is all from a place of self, honestly. And then let's look in comparison at godly wisdom. Godly wisdom, it said that it is first pure. First and foremost, it is pure, meaning that there is no ulterior motive. There is no other agenda, right? It's pure and clean and sanctified. It's peaceful. It is considerate. It is submissive, meaning it does not need to overpower anything or anyone to prove itself or to prove its significance. It's merciful, right? Impartial, sincere. Even just in hearing the explanations of both of those, one of them just sounds so much better. Just sounds so much better. But when you are seeking wisdom from a place of the fear of God, then that's what we're going to find. We're going to find purity. We're going to find peace. We're going to find love and consideration and mercy, which I think it's important to point out, because when we say the fear of the Lord, right, that sounds really harsh sometimes. But what we're going to find there is this soft, gentle, loving God and this soft, gentle, loving spirit that lives within us. And so that's what that wisdom is going to invite. That's what that wisdom is going to reveal. So if you're seeing an increase, right, in yourself or in your circumstances, if there's an increase in purity and in peace and mercy and submission and sincerity and compassion, if you're seeing an increase in these things, then you are also seeing an increase in godly wisdom. And that really is what we're after, or that's what we should be after. So again, think about your intentions when you have prayed for wisdom and when you have asked God to make you wise. What was your heart posture? Were you asking from a place of the fear of the Lord, or were you asking from a place of self? Were you asking for wisdom so that you could make the right decisions and try to avoid pain and suffering? Or were you asking for wisdom so that you could look more like Christ? Were you asking for wisdom so that you could know how you need to die to yourself in order to make room for his will? Were you asking for wisdom so that you could grow in the fruits of the Spirit and be pure and peaceful and pleasing to him? So think back to your intention. Why are we asking for these things? Because this godly wisdom also does not come easy, like we said earlier. And I think the wisdom that we seek that is earthly and of selfish ambition, we want it to come easy. But and I think I said this last week too, but whenever we're trying to grow in things of the Spirit and the fruits of the Spirit and training ourselves for godliness, we are going to war. Like, these things that are so pure and lovely do not come easily. They come on the other side of this warfare. They come on the other side of having to fight through all of the darkness. But that's why we need godly wisdom, because that's the only way that we're going to get through all of this darkness and not fall victim to it, and fall victim to the lie that we really ought to be just looking out for ourselves, because that's what the world will tell you. But God's going to tell you something different. So think about what posture you have been seeking these things from. Think about the things that maybe you know logically, and looking for ways to apply them so that we can grow in wisdom. Okay, let's move on to our question of the day. Just as a reminder, if you have a question that you want answered on the show, you can send me an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment wherever you are listening or watching this, or you can shoot me a DM or a comment on social media at Therapy and Prayer. So today's question says, I'm a 22-year-old who's never been in a relationship. Somehow I feel so pressed because most of my friends are in serious relationships, and it feels sad always being the single friend, especially when you're shaded about it sometimes. I'm tired about this. I just want to disconnect my feelings. I keep praying to God, and I'm tired of always being alone and pressured. I feel so young, yet so old, desperate, and pressed. How do I handle these emotions? So I decided I chose this question because I think that this is an opportunity where maybe I can share some wisdom that I've learned. And then also, just as a side note, this is the second person recently who has reached out about relationships again. And I have done an episode on singleness and relationships. So if you have not already, go ahead and listen to that. But y'all gonna have to let me know if that's something that we need to talk about again. I was hesitant to talk about it the first time, but if this is still, if we need to spend some more time here, then let me know and maybe we can do that. But this question really, I connected with it a lot because it's something that I have felt for a long time. And then I felt really old because this person was talking about being 21 and feeling old and dusty and pressed. And I was like, I'm solidly in my mid 30s and still single. So what does that say? But because I am single, I think that I have some wisdom that would be good to share to some of you all who are still very young, but are already, really yearning for that companionship and for that relationship. I think a lot of the times the wisdom that we get about relationships comes from people who are partnered or who are married or are in long-term relationships. And it's well-meaning, but it often misses the mark. It often doesn't do what it's intended to do, and sometimes can make us feel even worse. So I think that I have a good amount of wisdom on this topic just because of my experiences and where I am now. So a few things that I want to say to my good sis who wrote in with this question. First is that comparison is not a solid foundation for anything. In this question, you said that all of your friends are in serious relationships, and so that you feel sad because you're not. So part of why you feel bad is because you're looking at other people's circumstances and comparing it to yours. Comparison is not a strong foundation for anything. Meaning, if you got into a relationship because you were comparing your situation to everyone else's, if you started dating someone because you just didn't want to be the only single one, that's not a solid foundation for a good relationship, for the type of relationship that we want, right? Comparison is not a solid foundation for anything because if you started off that way, then you're always going to keep comparing. You're going to be a slave to comparison if that's the case, right? Then you'll get into a relationship and then you'll be comparing your relationship to your friends' relationships and saying, well, they do this, but we do that. How come, is it better over there? Should our relationship look more like theirs? It's never ending. The cycle of comparison is really never ending. So that's not a good or solid foundation for anything, especially when it comes to a relationship, because now you're involving another person. So that's first things first. Okay, now let's talk about your friends who are shading you for being single. Who do they think they are? Who do they think they are? First of all, of course, there's nothing wrong with being single. But if there are people in your life who are making you feel bad for your circumstances, then I think that there may be a space to look at what's going on in those friendships. Are they intentionally shading you, or are you feeling like Or are they making you feel bad unintentionally? In which case, if they're really good friends, then there should be room to have a conversation just about how they're making you feel with some of the comments that they're saying. But your friend should not be making you feel bad for your situation, not intentionally at least, especially when it comes to being single, because that's only going to perpetuate this idea that you have to hurry up and go out and find somebody to prove your value or to prove your worth. And especially at the age that you are, that's a fragile one because you're in early adulthood and you're trying to figure out life and who you are and what kind of person, what kind of adult you want to be. And I just remember being in my early 20s, just still putting a lot of emphasis on the perception of other people. And that played a big role in how I viewed myself and in how I saw myself. So if I could impart anything to you, I think that would be part of it is if you could find a way to detach from the perception of other people now, you'll be so much better for it in the future. But your friends should not be shading you for your singleness. They need to cut that out. If they're really your friends, they need to cut that out. I don't like that. I don't like that. Now, what a lot of people will say about being single is like, oh, this is great. Take some time to get to know yourself and to date yourself. And that's not what I want to say. But what I want to say is take this time to get clear on why you want to be in a relationship. So earlier we were talking about intention and why we're doing certain things. Think about your intention for wanting to be in a relationship. Is it because you feel like you're behind in life? Is it because you're comparing to other people? Is it because you feel like that's what's going to make you valuable or worthy, or that's what's going to validate you in some way? So be very clear on why you want a relationship, because that's going to inform how you show up in any relationship. And it's also going to inform the type of relationship that you accept. And what we don't want to do ever is settle for somebody for the sake of having somebody. We never want to do that. We never want to do that. So get clear on why you want a relationship and what kind of relationship you want. Sure, yeah, spend time with yourself. That's always great. I'm always going to be an advocate for that. But I'm sure that you have heard that already and are probably already doing that. But think about why you want to be in a relationship. Think about your intention, that heart posture that we talked about earlier. And then lastly, and this is really big, please don't let your singleness make you jaded towards God. You talked about, really praying about it and asking God to change your situation. And this is one of those things that can really harden our heart towards God when He doesn't answer it the way that we want. When He doesn't give us the answer we want, He doesn't give us the partner or the spouse that we want. There have definitely been times in my walk where there was some tension in my relationship with God because of my singleness. Absolutely, there has been some tension there. And so my overall encouragement is that you would use this to run towards God instead of away from Him. Be open to the fact that He might be answering other prayers for you right now or moving in other ways, even if He's not moving in this way. And if God is not bringing someone into your life right now, then that means that He's doing something else in you. That maybe there's some work that He wants to do in you. And honestly, what I have been thinking about now is, God wants me for Himself right now because He got some important things that He's needing me to do right now, and He doesn't want me distracted. So whatever it is, talk to God about how you're feeling, but don't let your singleness cause you to be jaded towards Him, because that's going to be an uphill battle of trying to reconcile that. It's absolutely possible because God is good and gracious and merciful. But if you can, kind of save yourself that unnecessary struggle. Now, look at me talking about saving unnecessary struggle when I just talked this whole time about the fact that we cannot avoid struggle. If you can learn from me, then go ahead and do that. I know that this is a walk that you have to go on your own. And so take what it is that I'm saying and think about what it might look like to apply that for you, right? But this is just some of the wisdom that I have learned over the years with dating and relationships and singleness. And I think that it can hopefully really help you and maybe some other people who are listening to this. So as we're doing this thing together and walking in community, another reason that we gain wisdom is not just for ourselves, right? But it is so that we can be witness to other people and so that we can help one another as we're walking through this thing. So I'm always going to try to share the wisdom that I learned. That's a big part of what this podcast has become. I don't know if it always started out that way, but that's what it has become. Is me really sharing a lot of the lessons that I have learned, am learning, things that God is showing me, so that we can really help to lift one another up, and help one another walk in obedience. So good luck to you. I understand though. I understand. Listen, and we don't know how long we're going to be single. So go on and settle in. We can't give God a timeline for these things. But know that God's plan is always better than your own. So if he is keeping you single, then it's because it's better for you to be single right now than to be partnered and to be with someone. That's a tough pill to swallow. But if we believe that God is sovereign, then that's what that has to mean. Period. All right. Okay. I hope y'all was able to follow me. Again, feel like I've been all over the place. I feel like I've been all over the place the past few weeks, but I'm getting some good feedback. Y'all are saying that it's helpful to you and that it seems like a lot of us are in a similar space right now. So that makes me feel good. But thank you all, as always, so much for being here. Thank you for listening. I love you so much, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Therapy and Prayer. Make sure you're subscribed and following wherever you listen to podcasts. And if the spirit moves you, go ahead and leave us a review. If you want to submit a question to be answered on this show, send us an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com. And make sure you're following us on TikTok at Therapy and Prayer. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you soon.